They refused Malik a seat at the reading because the chair beside the family was reserved for heirs. 20 minutes later, the attorney opened the final envelope and announced that Malik Grant had inherited the mansion, the company shares, the land, and every valuable object inside the estate. The silence that followed was not the silence of grief. It was the silence of wealthy people realizing the man they had ordered to stand by the door now owned the room. Malik arrived at Ashcroft Manor shortly before 11 on a cold November morning. Rain darkened the shoulders of his simple charcoal coat, and dried mud clung to the edges of his shoes from the long walk between the estate gates and the main house. The mansion stood above the valley like a monument to another century. Gray stone towers rose over clipped gardens and ancient oak trees. Black cars lined the circular driveway. Through the tall windows, Malik could see members of the Whitmore family gathering beneath crystal chandeliers for the reading of Alistair Whitmore's will. Alistair had died 8 days earlier at 84. Newspapers described him as a shipping magnate, hotel owner, and one of the richest private landowners in the state. His estate included Ashcroft Manor, 26,000 acres of farmland and woodland, controlling shares in Whitmore Maritime, 3 historic hotels, an art collection, and investments worth hundreds of millions. To the public, Alistair had been stern, private, and almost impossible to approach. To Malik, he had been the elderly man who sat in the greenhouse every Thursday afternoon and asked questions no one else bothered to answer honestly. Malik had worked at Ashcroft Manor for 11 years. His official title was grounds maintenance assistant. In practice, he repaired gates, restored furniture, maintained the greenhouse heating system, drove Alistair to medical appointments when the family chauffeur was unavailable, and sometimes stayed through the night when storms threatened the old roof. He had also been the only person present when Alistair suffered his first stroke. Malik found him collapsed beside the greenhouse fountain, called emergency services, performed first aid, and rode with him to the hospital. Alistair never forgot it. The family treated the event as an unfortunate moment in which an employee happened to be nearby. Malik did not expect gratitude from them. He did expect to be permitted inside the will reading after receiving a formal letter from Alistair's attorney. The invitation was folded inside his coat. At the mansion entrance, Family Security Director Hollis Crane looked at it without taking it from Malik's hand. "Staff are gathering in the West Service Hall," Hollis said. "I was asked to attend the formal reading. That gathering is for family beneficiaries. The letter names this room and this time." Hollis glanced toward the grand salon. "Wait here." He disappeared through the double doors. Malik remained beneath the portrait of Alistair's grandfather while guests walked around him. Some recognized him and nodded politely. Others handed him wet umbrellas, assuming he was stationed there to collect them. He placed each umbrella inside the brass stand without comment. Then Alistair's eldest son entered the hall. Reginald Whitmore was 57, silver-haired, broad-faced, and dressed in the kind of dark suit that made mourning look like an executive responsibility. He had served as vice chairman of Whitmore Maritime for 20 years and expected to become chairman immediately after the estate settled. Reginald stopped when he saw Malik. "What are you doing here?" "I was invited to the reading." "By whom?" "Mr. Whitmore's attorney." "My father's legal team sent notices to many employees. There will be a separate distribution of staff gifts. This invitation says I should attend the principal reading." Reginald held out his hand. Malik gave him the letter. Reginald read it, then looked toward Hollis. "This must be an administrative mistake." Malik took the letter back. "Perhaps the attorney can decide that." Reginald lowered his voice. "Do not embarrass yourself. My father occasionally made sentimental promises when he was ill. If he left you money, the lawyers will contact you privately. I did not ask him for money. No employee ever does directly." The words were spoken quietly enough that the approaching relatives could pretend not to hear them. Reginald's younger sister, Celia Whitmore Sloan, entered wearing a black silk dress and a pearl necklace that had belonged to their mother. At 52, Celia managed the Whitmore Foundation and spoke publicly about dignity, access, and fairness. She looked at Malik as though his presence threatened all three. "Is there a problem?" Malik believes he belongs inside the family reading, Reginald said. Celia's expression softened into practiced sympathy. Malik, father appreciated your service. We all do. But today may become emotional. It is probably better for employees to wait separately. I received a direct invitation. Invitations were generated from estate records. The letter includes a handwritten note. Celia's sympathy disappeared. From father? Yes. What does it say? Malik unfolded the lower section. Malik, you stood beside me when those who shared my name were too busy waiting for what I would leave behind. Come hear the truth with them. Reginald read the note over Celia's shoulder. His jaw tightened. Their younger brother, Franklin Whitmore, approached with his wife and 2 adult sons. Franklin had spent most of his life moving between expensive hobbies and failed ventures funded by family money. What truth? Franklin asked. No idea, Reginald said. Father became dramatic toward the end. Malik folded the letter. Celia glanced toward the salon where the family attorney was arranging documents at a long mahogany table. All right, she said. He can stand at the back. Malik looked through the doors. Rows of chairs had been arranged around the table. Several remained empty. I would prefer to sit. Franklin laughed, not loudly, just enough for his sons to join him. This is a private family estate, not a public waiting room. Malik looked toward the empty chair nearest the door. That one appears available. Celia stepped in front of it. It is reserved. For whom? An heir. Malik looked around the room. Every known heir was already present. Reginald handed the invitation to Hollis. Let him observe from the wall. If he causes a disturbance, remove him. Malik entered the grand salon and stood beside the door. No one introduced him. The family members occupied the center chairs according to rank. Reginald sat at the head beside his wife Lydia. Celia sat with her husband and daughter. Franklin took the opposite side with his sons. Several distant cousins filled the remaining seats. Alistair's personal physician attended. So did the estate accountant, the household director, and 2 board members from Whitmore Maritime. At the far end of the table sat attorney Rosalind Vane. She was 61, with close-cropped gray hair, dark-framed glasses, and the controlled expression of someone who expected the next hour to become unpleasant. An old leather case rested beside her. Rosalind looked around the room. Then she saw Malik standing near the door. Mr. Grant, there is a chair for you. Every face turned. Malik glanced toward the empty seat Celia had blocked. Reginald spoke first. Rosalind, we understood that chair was for an additional family beneficiary. It is. No one moved. Rosalind looked directly at Celia. Please allow Mr. Grant to sit. Celia's cheeks colored. My father's note may have invited him as a witness, but that does not make him family. I did not say it did. Then why is the chair placed at the principal table? Because Alistair instructed me to place it there. Reginald leaned forward. We can begin without creating unnecessary theater. Rosalind closed the folder in front of her. We will begin when everyone named in the attendance instructions is seated. The room remained silent. Malik walked toward the chair. Franklin's eldest son, Preston, shifted it several inches away from the table with his foot. Malik noticed. So did Rosalind. She waited until Malik pulled it back into position and sat down. Only then did she begin. Alistair Percival Whitmore executed several wills during his lifetime, she said. The document being read today was signed 8 months ago, witnessed by 2 independent attorneys, reviewed by a medical specialist, and confirmed through a recorded competency examination. Reginald's eyes narrowed. Why was a competency examination necessary? Your father anticipated that someone in this room might challenge his decisions by claiming mental decline. Franklin leaned back. He had suffered 2 strokes. He retained full testamentary capacity. Celia looked toward Malik. Rosalind noticed the direction of her gaze. The medical opinion was obtained before Mr. Whitmore disclosed the distribution terms to any beneficiary. She opened the first envelope. The initial bequests appeared ordinary. Alistair left substantial donations to the regional hospital, agricultural college, and maritime workers' pension fund. Long-serving household employees received payments based on years of service. The housekeeper received enough to retire. The chauffeur received a cottage and a lifetime maintenance allowance. Several grounds workers received educational trusts for their children. Franklin whispered that his father had become generous with other people's inheritance. Rosalind continued. Personal jewelry belonging to Alistair's late wife was divided among Celia and the granddaughters. Franklin received a lake property and a trust that would provide a generous annual income but prevent him from borrowing against the principal. He immediately objected. My own father placed me on an allowance? He protected the inheritance from your creditors, Rosalind said. Franklin's wife looked down. Celia received the family's coastal residence and $30 million designated for the Whitmore Foundation, although the funds would be overseen by an independent board. Celia stiffened. I am already the foundation president. The will removes family control over grants and investments. On what basis? Your father included a letter addressing that decision. It will be read later. Reginald received his father's collection of vintage automobiles and the right to remain in his current city residence for life. He waited for the company shares. Rosalind did not mention them. Instead, she read gifts to grandchildren, distant relatives, universities, and conservation programs. The entire room grew more tense as the largest assets remained undistributed. Finally, Rosalind placed both hands on the final sealed envelope. This section concerns the residuary estate. Reginald adjusted his cuff. Franklin stopped whispering. Celia sat perfectly still. The residuary estate included everything not specifically given away: Ashcroft Manor, most of the surrounding land, Alistair's controlling shares in Whitmore Maritime, his hotel interests, investment accounts, archives, artwork, and remaining personal property. Rosalind broke the seal. I leave the entirety of my residuary estate without division to Malik Josiah Grant. No one reacted immediately. The words were too unexpected to understand. Then Franklin laughed. It was a sharp, disbelieving sound. Reginald turned toward Rosalind. Read that again. She did. I leave the entirety of my residuary estate without division to Malik Josiah Grant, subject only to the charitable obligations and employee protections described herein. Celia stared at Malik. Preston stood so quickly that his chair struck the floor. This is absurd. Franklin pointed toward Malik. What did you make him sign? Malik did not move. Reginald looked at Rosalind. My father left the controlling shares of a multi-billion-dollar company to a grounds employee? Yes. The mansion? Yes. The agricultural land? Yes. The hotels? Yes. And the family archive? Yes. Reginald's face changed from shock to fury. This document is invalid. Rosalind had expected that. The original is registered with the probate court. Certified copies are held by 2 independent law firms. The signing was recorded. He was manipulated. His doctor concluded otherwise. By him. Reginald pointed directly at Malik. Malik looked at the finger, then at Reginald's face. I did not know what was in the will. No one believes that. I did not ask anyone to. Celia rose. You spent years alone with father. I worked here. You drove him to appointments. When the chauffeur was unavailable, you controlled access to the greenhouse. I repaired and maintained it. You filled his head with stories about how the family neglected him. Malik's expression hardened. I never needed to tell him who visited. He kept a calendar. Franklin stepped toward him. You think you can walk into our home, sit at our table, and steal everything our family built? Rosalind closed the will. This is now Mr. Grant's home. The sentence stopped Franklin beside the chair. Hollis remained near the door, visibly uncertain whose orders carried authority. Reginald faced Rosalind. You will provide every medical record, draft, witness statement, and communication connected to this will. They are already preserved. And until the court reviews them, no asset moves. Certain protections took effect upon Alistair's death. What protections? Reginald, your executive authority over Whitmore Maritime was suspended yesterday. Reginald's face drained of color. Two board members at the table lowered their eyes. You knew, one of them answered quietly. The board received instructions from the estate trustee. I am vice chairman. You were, Rosalind said. Alistair's voting shares have transferred into a temporary trust controlled by 3 independent trustees. Mr. Grant holds the beneficial interest and will assume voting authority after orientation and court confirmation. Reginald looked at Malik with open hatred. You arranged this. Malik remained seated. I learned about it 30 seconds before you did. Celia turned to Rosalind. Why him? Rosalind placed another envelope on the table. Your father explained. The letter was 12 pages long. Rosalind began reading. Alistair wrote that wealth had given his children comfort, education, and opportunities, but had also allowed them to confuse inheritance with entitlement. He described Reginald using company funds to protect failing private investments and pressuring the board to approve contracts involving his wife's relatives. Reginald interrupted. Those transactions were reviewed. Your father disagreed, Rosalind said. The letter described Celia directing foundation grants toward institutions that invited her to galas while rejecting smaller organizations that offered no public recognition. Celia's eyes filled with anger. He never understood modern philanthropy. Alistair had included specific reports. He described Franklin repeatedly selling family property to cover gambling debts, then asking employees to hide the transactions. Franklin called the letter vindictive. Then Rosalind reached the section about Malik. Alistair first noticed him 11 years earlier after a winter storm damaged the greenhouse roof. Contractors refused to climb the structure until the wind weakened. Malik secured the glass panels himself because rare seedlings and historical plants would have frozen overnight. Alistair offered him money. Malik requested new safety equipment for the maintenance staff instead. 2 years later, Malik discovered accounting irregularities and payments to temporary estate workers. Supervisors were deducting illegal equipment fees from their wages. He reported it. The household director at the time advised him to remain silent if he wanted to keep his position. Malik brought the records directly to Alistair. The workers were repaid. The director was dismissed. Reginald asked why no one had been told. Rosalind read Alistair's answer. Because I wanted to see whether my children would notice the people who kept their inheritance standing. They did not. The letter described the greenhouse stroke. Malik found Alistair, gave emergency aid, and stayed at the hospital until dawn. Reginald visited after an executive meeting. Celia arrived after a fundraising dinner. Franklin came 2 days later and asked whether the medical crisis would delay a scheduled property transfer. Franklin denied it. Rosalind produced the visitor log. Alistair recovered. Over the next 4 years, he began inviting Malik to tea in the greenhouse. They discussed land management, employee housing, shipping safety, and the future of the company. Malik had grown up near the Whitmore shipyards. His father, Josiah Grant, worked there for 32 years before dying from an industrial lung condition. Malik's mother cleaned offices at a Whitmore hotel. Reginald frowned. Why would father give him the estate because his parents were employees? Rosalind continued reading. Alistair had discovered that Josiah Grant was more than an employee. 35 years earlier, Whitmore Maritime faced collapse after a major accident, insurance dispute, and dock workers' strike. Josiah, then a union safety representative, developed a restructuring plan that reopened the port, protected hundreds of jobs, and prevented lenders from seizing the company's ships. Alistair promised Josiah a small ownership stake if the plan succeeded. It succeeded. The shares were never transferred. Reginald looked confused. I have never heard this story. That is part of your father's point, Rosalind said. Josiah later became ill. He requested compensation for the agreement, but company lawyers described the promise as informal. Alistair did not intervene. He convinced himself that paying Josiah a bonus and medical costs was sufficient. Josiah accepted the money because Malik was still a teenager and the family needed treatment expenses. He died without receiving ownership. Malik stared at Rosalind. This part was new to him. My father never said anything about shares. He did not want you to inherit his anger, Rosalind replied. Alistair found the original correspondence while reviewing company archives 2 years earlier. There were letters between him and Josiah, board minutes referencing the promised interest, a draft share agreement prepared but never executed, and a personal diary entry in which Alistair admitted he delayed the transfer until Josiah became too ill to fight. The room fell quiet. Reginald's anger shifted into calculation. A promised small stake from 35 years ago does not equal the whole estate. No, Rosalind said. Alistair acknowledged that. The letter explained that the forgotten agreement caused him to examine everything else he believed his family had earned. He found that Malik had spent 11 years protecting the estate without using his closeness to Alistair for personal gain. When offered promotions that would require supervising staff from an office, Malik declined because the positions lacked authority to improve working conditions. When Alistair proposed paying off Malik's home loan, Malik refused. When asked what he would do with wealth, Malik spoke about restoring abandoned worker housing near the shipyards, establishing medical support for retired dock workers, and protecting the farmland from luxury development. Alistair secretly tested all 3 children. He asked Reginald what should happen to the old worker cottages. Reginald proposed demolition and commercial development. He asked Celia whether the foundation should fund medical screenings for former shipyard workers. She rejected the proposal because the program lacked sufficient visibility. He asked Franklin whether the northern woodland should be protected permanently. Franklin had already promised a developer he could secure access after inheriting it. Then Alistair asked Malik. Malik said the cottages should be repaired before another winter, the workers should receive medical screening whether anyone published photographs or not, and the woodland should remain untouched because some things lost to profit could never be purchased back. Celia folded her arms. So father rewarded agreement? No, Malik said for the first time in several minutes. He asked my opinion. I gave it. You told him exactly what he wanted to hear. I disagreed with him often. The letter confirmed it. Malik opposed Alistair's plan to close a regional shipyard and move operations overseas. He presented wage records, transport costs, and safety risks. Alistair initially dismissed him. Malik returned with a detailed alternative developed with dock supervisors. The company followed it. The shipyard became profitable within 18 months. Reginald looked toward the 2 board members. Neither denied it. Why was I not told Malik created the plan? One board member answered. You presented it as your restructuring proposal. Reginald's face went still. Malik looked at him. So that was where it went. Rosalind continued to the final page. I am not leaving Malik my estate because he saved my life once. I am leaving it because he spent years refusing to sell me comfort when truth was more useful. My children believe blood gives them a permanent claim over everything I built. They forget that thousands of hands built it with me, including the hand of Josiah Grant, whose promised ownership I stole through delay and silence. I cannot repay Josiah. I cannot return the years Malik's family lived without what should have been theirs, but I can refuse to let the same people who ignored that history inherit the power to repeat it. Rosalind lowered the letter. No one spoke. Malik looked down at his hands. His father had worked until illness made walking difficult. He had died in a small rented house while the Whitmore Company expanded into new ports and luxury hotels. Malik had believed his father was proud merely to have protected jobs. Now he understood that Josiah had also been betrayed. Reginald recovered first. This is guilt, not estate planning. It is both, Rosalind said. We will challenge it. You have that right. Celia pointed toward Malik. He is not qualified to control these assets. The will includes a transition structure. Meaning? For 3 years, Whitmore Maritime will operate under an independent professional board. Malik will receive training, full access to company records, and the right to approve major decisions. He may appoint executives but cannot sell controlling shares during the transition. Franklin laughed bitterly. Father turned the company into a lesson. He tried to prevent it from becoming an inheritance auction. Reginald stood. This meeting is over. Rosalind looked at him. You do not have authority to end it. Reginald looked toward Hollis. Remove Malik from the property. Hollis did not move. Reginald's voice rose. I gave you an order. Rosalind spoke calmly. Mr. Crane's employment now falls under the estate trustee. He has been instructed to protect Malik and preserve the property. Hollis removed his earpiece. I cannot remove the legal owner without cause. The sentence humiliated Reginald more than the will itself. He walked out. Celia followed after gathering her handbag and the pearl necklace left to her. Franklin remained long enough to ask Rosalind whether Malik could change the lake property trust. He cannot. Franklin nodded and left without looking at Malik. Within 48 hours, the family filed a lawsuit contesting the will. They alleged undue influence, lack of capacity, fraudulent isolation, and manipulation by an employee who had gained private access to Alistair. News reports describe Malik as a groundskeeper who inherited a billionaire's fortune. Old photographs from the estate website were used without context. One showed Malik repairing a garden wall. Another showed him standing behind Alistair's wheelchair. Commentators asked how a maintenance worker could become the sole heir to an estate worth hundreds of millions. Reginald gave an interview. My father was vulnerable, he said. A trusted employee exploited his loneliness and separated him from his family. Malik watched the interview from the small cottage where he had lived before the will. Rosalind sat across from him with 3 boxes of evidence. Did you separate Alistair from anyone? She asked. No. Did you ever prevent visits? No. Did you discuss his will? He asked once what I would do if I owned land like Ashcroft. I thought it was theoretical. What did you say? That I would repair the tenant cottages and create a permanent conservation trust. Did he mention inheritance? No. Did he give you money? Christmas bonuses, the same as other staff. Any private transfers? No. Rosalind opened the first box. Then the evidence will speak. Alistair had prepared carefully. Every meeting about the will was recorded. He traveled to independent law offices without Malik. 3 doctors evaluated his cognition. A retired judge interviewed him privately about each beneficiary and asset. Alistair explained the reasons for excluding his children from control in exact detail. The video showed no confusion. When asked whether Malik knew about the will, Alistair answered, He suspects I respect him. He has no idea how little I respect what my children have become. The family's claim of isolation collapsed under calendars showing that Alistair invited them to monthly dinners. Reginald canceled 7 times. Celia attended twice, leaving early for events. Franklin came only when requesting money. Malik was present regularly because he worked on the estate. Household testimony supported him. The nurse said Malik encouraged Alistair to call his children after arguments. The chauffeur said Malik repeatedly offered to leave the greenhouse when family arrived. The physician confirmed Malik never interfered with treatment. Then the company archives revealed more. The shipyard restructuring plan credited to Reginald had been drafted primarily by Malik and 5 dock supervisors. Emails showed Reginald removing their names before presenting it to the board. The foundation records showed Celia redirecting worker health funding toward a museum wing where her name would appear on the donor wall. Franklin's messages confirmed negotiations to sell protected woodland before Alistair died. The lawsuit that was supposed to expose Malik instead revealed why Alistair distrusted his children. But the most important evidence concerned Josiah Grant. An archivist found the unsigned share agreement. It promised Josiah 4% of Whitmore Maritime if his restructuring plan prevented bankruptcy, 4% at the time. After decades of growth and reinvestment, the stake would have been worth an enormous sum. A handwritten note from Alistair instructed the legal department to delay execution until the labor situation becomes less sensitive. Months later, Josiah became ill. Another note recorded a private settlement covering his medical treatment in exchange for releasing future claims. Josiah's supposed release carried a signature copied from a hospital form. Malik stared at it during the court hearing. "That is not how my father signed his name." A forensic examiner agreed. The release was forged. Alistair had discovered it only after reopening the files. His diary showed he did not order the forgery, but once Josiah accepted the medical payment, Alistair chose not to investigate. He benefited from the silence. In his recorded testimony, Alistair said, "I spent years telling myself I had not stolen from Josiah because I had not forged the page, but I knew the promise existed, saw that he had been removed from it, and accepted the result. A man does not need to hold the pen to profit from a lie." The court upheld the will. The judge found no evidence of manipulation and overwhelming evidence of Alistair's capacity and independent intent. Malik became the legal owner of the residuary estate. Reginald appealed. He lost again. Celia resigned from the Whitmore Foundation after an independent audit. Franklin retained his protected trust but lost access to additional family funds. The Whitmore children received wealth. They did not receive control. The day after the final ruling, Malik entered the Grand Salon alone. The chairs from the will reading had been removed. Dust floated through the winter sunlight. Alistair's portrait hung above the fireplace. Malik stood beneath it. "You could have told me about my father," he said. The portrait did not answer. Rosalind entered quietly. He was ashamed. He had years. Yes. He gave me everything after my father died with almost nothing. Yes. That is not justice. No. Malik looked toward her. Then why does everyone keep calling it that? Because people prefer endings that balance neatly. This does not. Rosalind nodded. Alistair knew that. Malik did not move into the mansion's private family rooms. He converted part of Ashcroft Manor into an archive and training center dedicated to the workers who had built Whitmore Maritime. Former shipyard employees and their families were invited to contribute records, photographs, and oral histories. Josiah Grant's name became the first entry. The restored worker cottages were placed inside a housing trust. Retired employees could live there at reduced cost. Medical screenings began at every active and former Whitmore shipyard. Celia had once rejected the program because it lacked visibility. Malik made certain it received funding without requiring participants to appear in promotional materials. The northern woodland was permanently protected. Franklin's developer threatened to sue. The contract had never been valid. Whitmore Maritime's new board reviewed safety, wages, environmental violations, and decades of employee invention records. Malik discovered that Josiah was not the only worker promised something that disappeared after profitability arrived. Mechanics, engineers, dock supervisors, and office clerks had created systems that saved the company millions. Their contributions had been absorbed into the Whitmore name. Malik established an ownership and royalty policy. Workers whose ideas generated major savings or revenue received documented shares in the result. Reginald called the policy reckless. The company's profits initially fell. Employee retention rose. Accidents declined. Within 4 years, profits exceeded their previous level. Malik never used the title billionaire, though the financial press applied it to him repeatedly. He wore better suits when required, but kept the old charcoal coat from the will reading. Its sleeves had been repaired twice. A journalist once asked why. "It reminds me how people spoke to me before they knew what was inside the envelope." Alistair's children remained distant. Celia eventually requested a meeting. She came to Ashcroft Manor without assistance. Malik received her in the greenhouse where Alistair once drank tea. "I hated you," she said. "I know. I thought you had taken our father from us. You were welcome here. That is easy for you to say. No, it is easy for me to prove. Your invitations are in the archive. Celia looked away. I convinced myself he preferred you. He preferred honesty. Is that supposed to make me feel better? No. She walked toward the fountain where Alistair suffered his stroke. Did he love us? Yes. Then why humiliate us? Malik considered the question. He did not leave you nothing. He left us things and gave you the family. The estate was never the family. To him it was. That may have been part of the problem. Celia's eyes filled with tears. I spent my life preparing to preserve his legacy. You spent your life preparing to inherit his authority. She did not deny it. What would you have done if he left everything to Reginald? I would still work here until Reginald removed me. He would have. Yes. And the cottages? Sold. The woodland? Developed. The company? Malik looked through the glass toward the distant valley. People would keep building it. Their names would keep disappearing. Celia visited again months later, then again. She never regained control of the foundation, but she began volunteering with the worker medical program without press coverage. Some suspected she wanted redemption. Malik did not stop her. Motives could be imperfect while actions still became useful. Reginald never reconciled. He formed a smaller investment company and spent years claiming Whitmore Maritime had been stolen by sentimentality. His company failed after several risky acquisitions. Franklin sold the lake property as soon as the trust allowed him to do so. Malik used part of Alistair's personal fortune to establish the Josiah Grant School of Maritime Safety and Engineering. Admission favored children from port communities, but entry remained based on talent and commitment rather than family names. At the opening ceremony, the first row contained former dock workers. The Whitmore family received invitations. Only Celia attended. Rosalind sat beside her. A chair remained empty between them, not reserved for an heir, reserved for Alistair. Malik stood at the podium but did not speak about the fortune. He spoke about Josiah. My father believed saving hundreds of jobs was enough, even after the promise made to him disappeared. He taught me not to measure dignity through what powerful people were willing to admit, but dignity should not become an excuse for accepting theft quietly. Behind him hung a copy of the original share agreement, not the forged release, the promise. After the ceremony, an elderly dock worker approached Malik. Your father knew they cheated him, the man said. Why didn't he fight? He did at first. What stopped him? You got accepted into college. Your mother needed surgery. He thought a court case would consume everything. Malik looked toward Josiah's photograph. He chose us. Yes, and they counted on that. The old worker nodded. Powerful people often wait until survival becomes more urgent than justice. That sentence stayed with Malik. Years later, when employees challenged management decisions, he made certain complaints were heard before workers became desperate enough to trade rights for immediate relief. Ashcroft Manor changed slowly. The Grand Salon remained, but its walls no longer displayed only Whitmore portraits. Photographs of shipbuilders, kitchen workers, mechanics, hotel staff, gardeners, drivers, and accountants filled the corridors. Some visitors complained that the mansion looked less like a family estate. Malik answered that it had finally begun to look like the history of the fortune that paid for it. On the 10th anniversary of Alistair's death, Malik entered the salon during a memorial gathering. The original mahogany table stood in the center. Rosalind, now retired, sat near the fireplace. Celia spoke with former shipyard workers. Students from the Josiah Grant School occupied the front rows. Near the door stood a nervous young maintenance employee who had been invited to receive an innovation award for designing a safer heating control system. He had remained standing because every chair appeared occupied. Malik noticed. He walked to the front, lifted his own chair, and carried it across the room. This is yours, he said. The employee looked horrified. Sir, I can stand. So could I. Malik placed the chair beside the table. That did not make it right. The young man sat. Malik remained near the wall during the presentation. Some people tried to bring him another chair. He declined. This time, standing was his choice. The Whitmore family had refused Malik a seat because they believed chairs near power belonged only to people who inherited the correct surname. Then Alistair's final will revealed that Malik inherited the mansion, the land, the company, and the fortune they considered naturally theirs. But the will did not transform Malik from an insignificant employee into a worthy man. It exposed how badly the family had measured worth before the envelope opened. Malik had protected the estate when they treated it as a possession. He had listened to the workers they treated as expenses. He had preserved the land they intended to sell. And he had carried the truth of Josiah Grant, a man whose work saved the Whitmore empire even as his promised shares disappeared. They refused Malik a seat at the reading. In the end, he inherited the table, the room, and the responsibility to make certain no one else would ever be told they had to stand because their name was not important enough.